career path of a machine learning engineer?
So again, this is probably another question where I think it's not necessarily very different from other technical roles. Just like any other technical role, you can, as a machine learning engineer, you can choose to go one of the two paths. One is as an individual contributor, where once you grow in your career, you start solving basically bigger problems or more abstract problems, which are related to machine learning. So for example, like when you just join a company, you might be given that, hey, there is a model which is working. Can you try to tweak some parameters such that the accuracy of the model increases? That's a level of problem that you're solving. And once you keep growing, you might be like, hey, we want to solve like the credit card problem, try to come up with an approach. And once you grow further in your career, you might be like, you want to identify what are the future, what are the problems that can appear 5 years down the line, and you want to solve that problem yourself. So this is one path where you can grow in a individual contributor role. The other path is a managerial role, where you probably go a little bit higher than implementing things yourself, but you want to empower other machine learning engineers and data scientists, like a team of ML engineers and data scientists, to solve the technical issues, while you take the role of more mentorship and guidance and and improving their careers, while of course achieving the bigger objective of the problems that are being solved. So I think it's pretty similar to any other technical role.
Question is, what are the 4 challenges do you often face in your job as a machine learning engineer?
So at least one challenge is obvious to me, which is data. So as any other machine learning engineer would resonate with it, I think one of the biggest problem with ML engineering problem is having access to labeled data set all the time, because a lot of times when we formulate problems that we want to drive certain metrics, like, I don't know, revenues or click-through rates, etc., we don't necessarily have explicitly labeled data set by the user. Sometimes we do have access to implicit data set, in which case we don't necessarily know whether some of the implicit signals can be treated as a positive label or a negative label. So having access to that data set becomes challenging. The typical techniques that companies end up using is, if they don't have organic label data set, they want to hire people to sit down and label data set for them. But that process gets exorbitantly expensive. I guess the other thing that I can think of is basically defining the success criteria of the problem, because a lot of times your success criteria is the end goal of your machine learning problem that you're solving is, let's say, increasing conversion rates for an Amazon-like problem. Like, are you able to make people buy more? But getting that kind of a signal can take a long time to get feedback if your model is doing good or not. Plus, also has a lot of revenue impact directly if your model was doing bad. So you want to learn faster, except when you come up with these offline metrics where you can tune those offline metrics to get better at solving certain problems, you don't necessarily know if that offline metric will correlate well with your end goal. So defining the real success criteria and iterating fast on top of that becomes another issue. What else you asked? So one of the other problems, which is a little bit more technical in nature, is designing systems and separating between, let's say, the offline components of the system and online component of the system. So what I mean to say is there are some of the batch job kind of a thing that you can do offline training. And there are some things that you want to do when the user comes online or makes a real request. Now, the trade-off between the two is when you do things offline, you are able to, in the real time, you're able to do things a lot faster because you have all the computations done. Except what you lose out on is the more recency or the more up-to-date information, because you have processed some things a few hours before. So making that trade-off becomes challenging, that what kind of systems you want to process online versus offline. Last, it also becomes challenging, especially, and I think this is specifically true for the field of machine learning. That is, where do you draw the line between research and product utility? So a lot of times people get carried away when they're solving machine learning problems to do a little bit better because it's so objective. Like you have a model and you have an accuracy of what, 95%. Because it's so objective, people get into the researchy mode of making that 95 to 96%, 96 to 97%, and so on and so forth. And the incremental progress that you are making from 95 to 96, you might have to invest days and weeks of human effort to get that kind of a jump in accuracy. But from a product perspective, the company might not even care as much about that level of difference. So as a machine learning engineer, you really need to be conscious of your time and make sure that you are able to make that trade-off easily.
That you have undertaken as a machine learning engineer?
I'm not allowed to talk about that. So
Okay.
the most interesting project that I think I have done in my career in machine learning is the project that I'm doing now, and it's still um, under the covers. So I cannot talk about that. But to honor the question, I would, I guess, talk about the second most
No
interesting project
problem.
that I've worked so far. Um, so in basically, I was in my last job, I was building this thing called um, uh, a support for machine learning throughout the company. Like different teams are building ML solutions, and we wanted to build a centralized AI platform where we can support all the machine learning work in the company under one umbrella. And that obviously requires you to think, solve essentially all the problems that I mentioned earlier, which is like, understanding what are some components could be online, which components could be offline, how do you train models, how do you write data pipelines, and implement some of the models yourself so that that can be used directly as a library from like with other teams, by other teams in the company. So building that kind of a centralized platform from ground up was very interesting to me because it really gave me insights into machine learning models, but also the engineering around it. That what does it take to build a full-fledged ML system for while the company is still moving and while the products are still being used by real customers, and how do you move that kind to that kind of a moving product to a centralized platform. I think I found that problem very interesting.
Krishna says, is it better to get work experience or else does masters make much difference?
Hmm. That that to me is um, so it really depends. Like basically, by the way, that's a great question, and I don't think I have a um, very explicitly obvious answer to that question. I don't really know which one would make difference as to make your career successful. Um, what I can think of is it depends. It would depend on the kind of masters you are doing versus the kind of the job that you're doing, and maybe that's why it's a difficult question to answer straight away as a blanket solution to that answer. Because I'll tell you why. I'll tell you my experience that when I did my masters, I got to work at very open-ended problems. So like hey, this is the problem that we want to solve, and try to like see what kind of approaches you can take. And the thing that I got out of my masters was, how can you take a very vague problem, come up with reasonably interesting solutions, and then iterate on top of it to make it a working solution. So more than any specific experience in machine learning that I got out of that process, I think that thinking capability was I got out of my masters, and it became super useful for me. And that I think I have that kind of a skill I ended up using very frequently in my job, and that experience was very useful to me. Besides that, some of the courses that I took in a more official setting where I'm doing assignments and like taking exams, and that made a lot of my fundamentals very clear when during the masters. However, in a job, you probably won't have enough time to go into details about the different subjects that you are taking, so you may lose out on that. But you, depending on the job that you're doing, you may have even a higher degree of exposure to the first thing that I got out of my masters, which is you are given an abstract problem and you want to go ahead and come up with interesting solutions, because the iteration cycle in a job might be faster. So it really weighs down on like you have to really weigh down where are you going for your master, what kind of courses are you taking, versus where are you doing a job, and what kind of projects are you doing there. So I can't give a better answer to this question, I guess.
Thank you so much, Nikunj, for the answer. I'm sure, Vamsi Krishna, your question must have been answered great. And thank you so much for asking, Vamsi Krishna. So here comes my last question, Nikunj. What advice do you have for aspiring candidates to be successful in machine learning role?
um, Prepare well, read well, understand well. I think my advice essentially goes back to the initial thing that I mentioned, which is your intent matters. And if your intent is actually learning machine learning, then just go dive right into it, solve ML problems, and read machine learning books and attend machine learning courses. And just have that objective in your head, right? That you just want to be good at the subject, and not necessarily go after making your resume better or appearing smarter in front of people. If you are doing things right, your smartness will not be hidden. And if you are doing things from the wrong motive, it will become obvious. Maybe you will find a job by doing things um, with an objective of just finding a job, but it won't take too long in your job for you and for your peers to realize that uh, you essentially your heart is not in the right place. So I would just say that keep your heart in the right place and do your job right, and that's all it will take you to be successful either in machine learning or other career streams as well.